as well as the researchers, Willeke and Thomas, the sponsors of the study, and all other interested parties. You probably ask why we are here today at the university. The university has an important role in raising awareness and educating the community. It can do this by giving lectures, stimulating dialogues, providing training, and conducting research. It is very important to respond to the needs of the community. Integrity and transparency are very important values that need to be promoted. I'm pleased with the cooperation of the Foundation for Corporate Governance and Armand Hessels in Specialists. Thank you for initiating and all the long years of dedication and commitment. Thank you very much for this. And I'm pleased to able to host the presentation of this research and dialogues that will take place later this year, as we have a whole event series, I would say, and organized by the university's Aruba Good Governance and Leadership Institute, which will follow up on the subject. We will start by the end of this week with a dialogue with students and teachers on April 28th, and then go further with the general public on May 2nd. And now I would like to invite Mr.dr, the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Program Director of the Aruba Good Governance and Leadership Institute. She will us inform more of what is going on in the future. And now I would like to introduce you to our moderator for this evening, Dr. Mr.dr. Please come forward.
Buonanotte, good evening, protocol observed. Thank you, Professor Dr. Viola Heutger, for your opening words, and it's a pleasure to serve as a moderator for this event. Ladies and gentlemen, in the aula and also on Zoom, just some domestic remarks. Please place your cell phone on silence. And due to the tight schedule and the character of this evening, there's no too little room for discussion after the keynote presentation. However, that opportunity does exist, and extensively. First of all, like Ms. Rector said, there will be an opportunity for the students and lecturers on the 28th of April to discuss with Ms. Vilika Slingalongs about this topic, and also an interactive session for the general public with the keynote speaker is planned on the 2nd of May, starting at 10 a.m. The invitation to this interactive session will be sent tomorrow with a link to the National Integrity Scan Report. And the link to this report is also available at the website of Stichting Deugdelijk Bestuur Aruba. Now, it's a pleasure to introduce Mr. Armand Hessels. Armand Hessels has been the president for Stichting Deugdelijk Bestuur Aruba since its inception in 2016. Since then, he has produced 6 reports and several videos and organized 2 symposiums to raise awareness among the Aruban population about the serious consequences of defective governance for the community. In doing so, however, he not only criticizes, but also makes proposals to improve the quality of governance in the interest of the entire Aruban community. And he's also the member of the board of the Aruba Institute of Good Governance and Leadership of the University of Aruba since its inception in 2019. Mr. Armand Hessels.
Thank you, Mika, for your nice words, and to all our distinguished ladies and gentlemen here, good evening and welcome to this special occasion. In September 2019, we had our second symposium where I announced the possibility to do an investigation and analysis about the national integrity system. And I said, this is a very necessary analysis to do, but it's very costly. it's so costly that I cannot approach the government by itself to pay for the whole cost. I cannot approach the community because I think this is an effort of everybody to pay for the whole thing. Let's try to combine it. So I went first to the community, to different institutions, to ask their cooperation to participate in the financing of this investigation. And indeed, within a week, I had the participation of the community, which was 100,000 florins. Then I went to the government. And it took me one meeting with the Minister President of Aruba to get her approval of the participation of Aruba in this project. So in a pretty short time, we got the cooperation of both community and the government. I thought there was a very courageous decision of the Prime Minister to participate because she knew that this investigation would also be critical about the functioning of her own government. But she didn't hesitate. And I think that that is something to really appreciate. I'm very glad she participated. And that's why, of course, we invited her to give her first feelings about the termination of this project. After the first government, she handed over the part of integrity to a complete new person in politics, which I thought was a very good idea because it's good to approach this problem, if you may call it like that, with a complete blank mind. And I challenged the Minister of Integrity to come tonight with his views on the policy to improve integrity. So tonight we're going to hear first the Prime Minister of Aruba, and she will be directly followed by the Minister of Integrity with his views on the policy on integrity. Thank you very much. The Prime Minister of Aruba.
Buenas noches. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great honor that I'm standing here tonight for an important milestone. I take this opportunity to express my appreciation and offer my congratulations to all who made this possible. This is a vital milestone in achieving integrity within the public sector. Good governance is one of the most important topics, if not the most important topic for our government. And in 2019, I stood before you to share the vision of my government and the building blocks on which we wanted and we were creating and building the pillar of integrity. And a lot has happened since then, amongst other, the pandemic. But I can look now, I can look back with pride at the building blocks that the government of Aruba and the Parliament of Aruba have created, nevertheless, since then. The Integrity Bureau, BIA, Bureau Integriteit Aruba, which was instituted on October the 1st, 2018. BIA is in charge with raising awareness, with advising the government on preventive integrity policy and its implementation. And BIA is also the reporting center for integrity violations, now currently only within the public sector, but in the future also violations in the private sector. And although BIA was not fully staffed, in 2021, 57 reports have been received and handled by the BIA. Another building block is digitalization. From an integrity perspective, the establishment of the BIA has been aligned with our digital transformation plans. We believe that BIA will become a supporting factor in our strategy to digitalize government procedures on the road to e-government. We started the e-government process mid-2018, and this will also create more transparency and help in the fight against corruption, because you cannot bribe a computer. Another building block, corporate governance. We introduced and published a uniform corporate governance for state-owned companies and semi-public entities in December of 2020. A commission that we instituted, the Commissie Corporate Governance, they prepared a baseline assessment, which was also published. And this was a starting point to improve corporate governance within the state-owned entities. And then legislation. A very crucial legislation is the amendment on the legislation on political parties. Rules on financing of political parties were introduced since 2021. Those are now included in the law. Another crucial legislation is the law on integrity of the ministers, which stipulates conditions and procedures for the screening of candidate ministers and for safeguarding the integrity of the ministers during the period that they are in office. This law is in effect since the 1st of January of this year. And I have to mention that both laws were initiative of the Parliament. And I want to thank the Parliament, especially the President of Parliament, Mr. Edgar Vrolijk, who I consider an important partner in the construction of the Pillar of Integrity in Aruba. We are also working on the Independent Council on Elections, the Lectoraat. The process to become independent is in the starting blocks. This will include the independent supervisor on the financing of political parties. And today, we will receive the NIS, National Integrity System Assessment, a baseline study in our goal to prevent and fight corruption while fostering transparency and integrity with our government, within public and private sector, the media, the civil society as well. We have not scored high in this baseline NIS, but we knew this beforehand. My colleague, Minister Arends, is in charge with integrity and is preparing a strategic plan based on the NIS. He will tell you more about this. I want to make this commitment before you on behalf of the government of Aruba, that within 5 years, we will do another NIS, and then we can show how much we have improved on the recommendations that are given in this NIS. I can assure you that it cannot be, it will not be, and it cannot be a quick fix. It is a process that will need a systemic changes. It is a process that will need time, and it's a process that will especially need the collaboration and the input of all of us. These are only some of the building blocks, the most important ones. We are not there yet, but as with everything in life, the government and parliament cannot do this alone. We need to do this together. For corruption to take place, 2 parties are needed, the one paying the bribe and the one receiving the bribe. But ladies and gentlemen, these are extraordinary moments. We are writing a new chapter in this history of our country. Let's continue to work together to achieve our integrity goals, and with it, the acceleration of the SDG goals as well. By doing this, when our future generations look back in history, they will always know that the journey toward good governance and integrity started here, and that you are all part of it. I want to close with words by Michelle Obama. I think that she could not have said it better. We learned about honesty and integrity, that the truth matters, that you don't take shortcuts or play by your own set of rules, and that success doesn't count unless you earn it fair and square. Let yourself always be guided by the truth, by doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. Hartelijk dank.
Prime Minister, thank you so much for enlightening us on your vision on the importance of integrity and transparency, and the importance of the National Integrity Scan Report as an important baseline study for Aruba. Thank you. And now it's a pleasure to invite the Minister for Integrity, Nature, Transport and Elderly Care, His Excellency, Mr. Ursel Arends.
Bonoci. Good evening, everyone. And since the protocol was already served, so welcome everyone. And as the Minister of Integrity, I'm honored to be here today and to be part of the presentation of the National Integrity System assessment. This assessment is considered another tool that brings us one step closer to the collective goal for the Aruba Integrity Strategy 2022 to 2025. First, I want to extend my sincere thanks to the NIS Assessment Report Group. This NIS Assessment Aruba 2022 report has collected practical recommendations of different ministries, stakeholders, government officials, professional bodies, civil society organizations, and citizens group. The NIS Assessment Report provides helpful insights in preparation and implementation of the Aruba Integrity Strategy 2022 to 2025. A strategy that will be defined by stakeholders and key partners, and it is of high importance, priority as well. My ministry, my team, is one that places integrity as a core value in every work that we do. Integrity is a hollow word until we give it substance. It is based on personal norms and values. As such, we may all have our own interpretation and opinion on what it means in practice. In my view, integrity is about constant self-reflection and standing firm in what we do and what we believe in. As someone once said, integrity is telling the truth to others, but honesty is telling the truth to others. But integrity is telling the truth to myself. So other than what most might think, integrity is not something that should only be found on the level of government and its administrative or collective system, but it has a direct impact on every individual, enriching their lives. It should be noted that a system stands and falls by action of the individual. It is an individual citizen. It is as an individual citizen that I'm standing here tonight, led by my moral and ethical beliefs, of which bring my leadership as a minister in this community. It is fairly a positive correlation that the higher the level of personal integrity, that the higher the level of integrity within our collective system. Another correlation that is found is the one between integrity and corruption. In our society, it is often that we hear public comments that as a country, we are politically corrupted, with the result that there is a relative lack of confidence in the political system. Anti-corruption system should be strengthened on all levels. The NIS assessment concludes that our integrity system, Aruba, is weak, and there are no quick fixes to a change in a national integrity system. Especially, this cannot be achieved overnight. I must mention, though, that the first building blocks were put in the previous cabinet by my colleague, Prime Minister Mrs. Evelyn Cruz, and it is now up to all of us to continue building the structure for a better integrity system in Aruba. And despite the results of the NIS assessment, I am overly optimistic considering that a great part of the recommendations are already being executed or are in the process of development. In the last 8 months, my team and I, we work on at least 18 actions that we consider necessary, some of which are also discussed in the NIS assessment, to improve the level of integrity on the government level. 2 of these actions include guidelines for DVO, dienstverlening overeenkomst, and OVO, overeenkomst van opdracht, or in English, service agreements, and also the code of conduct for ministers. In the following period, my goal is to put an effort on more transparency and engage the whole community by stimulating open discussions about integrity. To conclude, I would like to take this opportunity to announce a project that my team and I has been working on, a platform to actively promote transparency in the government system. For this evening, I'm just gonna name it Project Paraplu, Umbrella Project. This is one of the many projects that we have in our planning to start informing the public about government process, project status, and expenses, just to mention a few. We believe that an informed public is essential for our society, and I hope that with this project, we can continue to contribute to the collective goal for a higher level of integrity within our collective system. I thank you all for your attention, and I wish you all a pleasant evening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ursel Arends, for your sharing your vision and that of your ministry, and the importance of strengthening integrity and transparency, as well as acknowledging this report. Thank you very much. Now it's a pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Vilika Slingalongs. Dr. Vilika Slingalongs is the head of Section Research Group on Resilient Democracy. She has 30 years of experience in good governance and integrity research. She has worked with governments, the business sector, media, and civil society to promote integrity by means of collective action. Willeke has a particular interest in exploring the link between networks and corruption. She was the lead researcher of the 2012 NIS Netherlands project, which she carried out by order of Transparency International Netherlands. Willeke is passionate about providing professionals and students with a set of knowledge, skills, and competencies to strengthen their individual and collective integrity. Ladies and gentlemen, I request your attention for our keynote speaker, Dr. Willeke Slingerland, Lector Resilient Democracy at the Section Hogeschool. Please come forward.
Yeah, so good evening to all of you, to both excellencies, to all of you who came here for this important topic. Thank you, Armand Hessels, with the Stichting Deugdelijk Bestuur Aruba. It's been amazing how actively engaged you've been on this important topic. As the moderator already mentioned, I've been involved in good governance for quite some time, but I haven't seen that much passion about such a, well, tough topic. So I'm very pleased to discuss, well, the findings of the NIS report with all of you. And I'm very pleased to be here in real life together with my colleague, because we have been working on this NIS project for 2 years from, well, remote, long distance. And it hasn't been that much fun to actually do it only via desk research and interviews. So I'm very pleased. Today, we've already met quite some stakeholders in place. And I look forward to all the meetings, formal meetings, informal meetings, to make sure that this important topic, well, this is the kickoff, that actually it's been heard and implemented in the coming years. So this is my first slide. And as you can see, you see a lot of change on the right-hand side. Well, as a symbol of what a system should look like. You probably heard in the Netherlands, we had a huge scandal, the child benefits scandal, in which many governmental organizations like ministries, tax authority, actually, well, thought that, well, child benefits receivers were fraudsters. And this leads to a huge, huge scandal. And the thing that really struck me is that actually, well, the Netherlands is considered to be a well-established democracy, that even a well-established democracy can never take democracy and good governance for granted. You should actually strive for good governance on a daily basis. And what is also a very important sign is to think of ourselves as individuals and as organizations as change in a bigger system. If we look at corruption only from a bribery perspective, so one abuses a power for the other and somebody gets something in return, this is a simple way of looking at corruption. What I'm trying to say, to visualize here, is that corruption is much more complex. Bad governance is much more complex. It's about informal circuits which can undermine checks and balances in any democracy. So we should never take that for granted, the well-respected democracy. And we are all part of actually promoting good governance and fighting corruption. So some of the background info, some of the dates were already mentioned. We were asked to do this NIS research assessment quite some years ago. And of course, we were enthusiastic about it because we have been trained in using the methodology by the anti-corruption watchdog Transparency International. And maybe if you heard about it, you know that it's situated, its secretary in Berlin. And up till now, it has about 160 chapters around the world. And in 2012, we were also involved in the Netherlands NIS assessment, which was part of the pan-European research. And I'm particularly enthusiastic about this method because, like I mentioned, if you look at good governance, well, looking at small forms of corruption or very plain and classic forms of corruption, you miss the bigger picture of, well, how organizations work together and actually strive for good governance or poor governance. So the NIS methodology uses this systemic approach, and I think that's the way we should look at democracy, rule of law, and to good governance, because then you get a good picture of the outcome as a whole. And that's what we are interested in as citizens. How do we actually notice good governance or poor governance? So this methodology is a very valuable tool because it gives you a very clear idea of what patterns of influencing decision-making actually become visible in a specific country. This is a 2-year project. It was supposed to be a 1-year project, but already COVID was mentioned. So it took us a lot of extra time, I must say. We were hoping that we would finalize it in 1 year, and it took us 2 years. We were supposed to do around 24 interviews. That's actually what the method describes, 2 interviews per pillar. We talked to 70 persons. So thank you to all of you who actually also were open for an interview. I see some of you are here today. And that was very valuable set of data which we received. Well, today I'm here with Thomas Riemersma, but there are 4 other colleagues who were involved, and well, we had a great fun in doing so. Well, like I mentioned, it's the kickoff. So often such a report, everybody's enthusiastic and think, okay, we are all on the same page, let's do this. But then it becomes, well, stuck in one of your cupboards, and nobody actually feels responsible of bringing this bigger message out in the world. So I was very pleased with hearing about the strategic integrity agenda and the law proposals which already have been made. So we should actually accept this, adopt this as a kickoff. We are all ambassadors of this NIS report. So all of us should think about how can I get this bigger picture? How can I have the recommendations be implemented? And that's what we've done in other countries as well. So have specific organizations, sectors, target groups actually accepting these recommendations as ambassadors and bring success about. Should I pinpoint it here or? Yeah. So what is the NIS assessment? It was mentioned already quite some time. It thinks of integrity as a Greek metaphor temple. So if you see this image, you can see the foundations, the political, institutional, socio-political, and socio-economic foundations. Any democracy, no matter where, should have a solid foundation in which there is enough money, there's well-being, there are strong institutions, there's public trust, all very important aspects on which you can actually build institutions. So if the foundations are weak, like we've noticed in COVID times when, well, economic recession was about to take place, or when big scandals hit a country, corruption scandals, public trust goes down, the foundations immediately are influenced by that. So you can build whatever institutions, Bureau of Integrity, Ombudsman, but if the foundations are weak, they won't become strong pillars. So that's a very important systemic way of looking at integrity. If you look at the pillars, we see 13 different pillars. So every NIS should actually, is there maybe a glass of water? Every, and you should stand here. So every pillar is composed of one or more organizations. So of course you have the judiciary. Thank you. Rechterlijke macht, you have the legislator, you have the ombudsman, you have political parties, all important institutions within a society, which all have a specific role to support integrity. So what we've done, we've looked at the foundations. We went to many books which have been written about Aruba, many publications, news articles. We spoke to, well, experts in the fields of these foundations. But of course, we went to go through each of these pillars. Each pillar should have its own independence in rules, should have its own resources, capacity. Is there enough money? Is there enough staff? Transparency rules. Do we actually disclose the way we make decisions or the way we do our permits? Thank you. So we've looked at all these institutions. We looked at the laws and we looked at the practice, because you can have many laws in place which promote integrity, but if the practice is poor, if they are not implemented, not respected, it's just paperwork. So that's actually in basic what we did. And on the right-hand side, you see a weak civil society actually making sure that all institutions fall down. It's like a domino effect. So either you have a strong or a weak foundations, and you have strong and weak institutions. And the whole idea about the system is that even if it's only one institution which is weak, as for example, a public sector, all other institutions are deteriorating and they all collapse. And this is a democracy going down. This is a democracy not having rule of law in place. And why is it important? Well, good governance is a precondition of all other things. So if we talk about how we should organize a society, how do we actually make sure that benefits are shared? How do we make sure that we, know how to fight climate change? Good governance is always a precondition for all other complex causes which we as a society are, faced with. So that should never be second order issue, no matter where. Good governance is the legitimacy of, why we are the way we are. So here, the right-hand side, this is not what you would like to see. And actually, you could say that some of the Aruba NIS looks like this. So there are very weak institutions in Aruba which influence all others. And I will go into the details. The last thing I would like to say is that the bullet points up there are sustainable development, quality of life, and rule of law. So these are the outcomes. These are the main reasons why we should actually have a strong integrity system. Yeah, thank you. So, what are the distinctive features of the Aruban NIS assessment? Well, of course, we come across the fact that Aruba has a small island situation. So it's a very close community with a lot of people who know one another. Many people share combinations of roles and functions, which make it also a very important social capital. So one knows one another and everybody's actively involved. But all good things also have a disadvantage. And of course, knowing one another, being very close to one another, having the networks and acquaintances is also a risk of preferential treatment and what I would say network corruption. So the second bullet point, a lot of informal circuits could be found here in Aruba. And some of the things I will say today are not new to all of you. Many reports have been written about Aruba, and of course, also the reports by the Central Bank of Aruba about corruption. We are aware of the figures, we are aware of the size of corruption. But again, this is about trying to understand what the mechanisms are which make the system, relatively weak. So the informal circuits here are stronger than the formal structures. And the formal structures are the ones we have on paper. Those are the checks and balances. Those are about how the judiciary should be independent and how the legislator, the Staten, should actually be independent and be a controlling party. So if we agree, and if we actually find that the informal circuits here are very strong, this means that there is an informal circuit which is stronger than everything we do on paper, everything we try to do formally. And this is I would say a very weak spot in the Aruban national integrity system. One other aspect which won't be a surprise to you is the low trust. No matter who we spoke to, there's a low trust generally in governments, in institutions. And actually this is influencing the foundations on which every institution should fulfill its role. Can you ever be a controlling party, or can you ever be an independent ombudsman Or can you be an electoral management body in charge of organizing the elections or in charge of overseeing the financial situation of political parties if the low trust is there? So this is a reason on its own already to try to stimulate good governance, because if the trust is low, all things you can actually organize and build, they won't be a success. What also was new for us as a team is the culture of fear. And I think that's a very important thing to realize. If there's low trust, but there's also a general sense of, fear of reprisal, that you actually do not dare to speak out within organizations, or you do not dare to talk about dilemmas, this won't bring society further. So we tried, of course, to have interviews, and in the first initial response was that people were afraid to talk about it. So that was already a sign that something in the foundational level is not correct at the moment. So we were pleased that at the end we were able to talk to a lot of interviews, but this is something which is very difficult to pinpoint what is the reason, but this is very important to try to analyze with one another. And the last bullet point, the decisive role played by political parties. If we look at the connections, there's family connections and there's connections among political parties, which are, the general denominator within these networks. And everything seems to be organized and decided by this, these networks and these political parties. So in a sense of individual roles of the pillars within the NIS, the independence is at risk because of these connections. I don't think this works, so maybe you were. So on the 2nd of May, we will have a long debate, discussion about all the details of the NIS. What I will now do is briefly mention the mechanisms which we came across. So what we generally noticed that across many institutions, there is a lack of urgency, a lack of culture on reporting. So what you expect in a society, in a well-established democracy, is that each institution, is making sure that it's transparent about what they do, how they decide, so that the public, us, all of us citizens, can actually know how this institution decided the way it did. For example, the Staten, the highest body of a democracy, the parliament. You would expect all the parts of a decision-making process or of a legislation process to be out in the open on its website, and we didn't find it. We simply couldn't find it. So this is a very basic requirement by law, very basic criterion which we assessed, and actually this was lacking. And the Staten was not the only organization. If we looked at civil society organizations, businesses, annual reports, who are the board members, how a board member selected, all this kind of information is not automatically to be found on the websites of these major institutions. So this is generally an observation. We should improve in Aruba the urgency, the responsibility in terms of being open about how decisions are made. Supervision is lacking. So in terms of internal checks and balances, do we have internal organizations within the different institutions which actually supervise the way decisions are made? This is generally lacking as well. So supervising in the way of audits, for example. And one thing, I must say, this might seem a bit harsh, but we concluded that there's no academic tradition. Of course, there's the University of Aruba, which does great, it fulfills great education and has a very interesting research program set up. But generally, if we were looking for academic journals in which Aruba as a society was described, or we searched for journals which were dealing with the political parties, what are the movements within political parties, there was little to no body of knowledge. And I think every well-established democracy, every proud democracy should actually make an urgency of researching its own. it cannot only be done by international researchers. So we were very pleased with the help of the students from the University of Aruba who did part of the research, part of the field work. And I guess this is the beginning of making integrity an important topic in a research agenda and making sure that Aruba ends up in the international journals, that actually it becomes a body of knowledge on which you can actually do evaluations. And I guess this is also very important as seeing the NIS as a kickoff. You could actually say, well, this is the baseline. And if we do more academic research, we can also go much deeper into individual institutions, write about it, and make sure that the academics know about Aruba. Well, lack of information. This was also generally on I mentioned the lack of transparency, but generally there's a lot of information missing on websites which are not up to date. And when we ask for specific informations, again, from, for example, the Staten, it simply was not to be found. So this is generally something which is considered to be a weakness. Yes, please. What I would like to see is that the younger generation to which we also spoke, that they actually become proud of Aruba, and they are proud and they are happy to a certain sense, but actually that there are certain figures which become an exemplary figure of a superhero, which is a part of the good governance. So that integrity, good governance is adopted by the younger generation, and that they feel that there is hope and that they can be part of this change. So we cannot continue with, well, very harsh terms and saying Aruba is very corrupt. We should also say the things which are good. And I think we heard of many initiatives going on which are hopeful, but make sure that also the younger generation sees that actually it's cool to be acting with integrity, not to be part of the old-fashioned way of doing things. In terms of education, primary, but also high school and also the university, of course, that's the leadership and integrity. And that's, I think, at the university, a good start. But it's very important to start also a movement from, well, bottom up to make children aware of their moral vocabulary, that they have a critical attitude, that they demand democracy. And this is, of course, the most important thing in talking about a systems change, that children feel that they can express and that they can demand and that they can actually show that they are accountable, that they take responsibility. So all the things we do today and all things that the government will be doing in terms of laws and making sure that we are complying with all the international standards, this is a good thing, but the movement from bottom up, that there's a new generation having this moral vocabulary, is a very important thing. And this is needed, especially with all the other new challenges which the younger generation is confronted with. For example, the digital transformation we are all as a society are seeing, so that children also know what is fake news, what is real, so the information that they can distinguish the right from the wrong. And that's also related to the other bullet point, the indifference towards corruption. I think that we should make sure that, of course, the harsh things, harsh messages are also being said, but there's also a time that we should bring hope and that we should actually say, but things can change. If you remember my first slide, looking at how a system, you can be the wheel actually going into the right direction. And if many wheels are all turning into the right direction, a system can change over time. Legal transplant, another thing which we came across, of course, with the historical background, there are some of the laws or institutions which are derived from the Dutch model. And I think it's very important that Aruba is very critical towards what things do you adopt or do you take over from, well, European perspective? And when do you actually say, no, this won't work in our society because we have a different society? And I had a great discussion already with the Prime Minister recently. For example, looking about the family connections and ties. Is it possible to make a rule in which you say, and actually it has been done, who can you appoint as a family member in your own situation as a minister? It's not up to us in this research to say this is actually what the rules should be like, but actually make sure that you have a discussion which is actually taking into account the typical situation here. And that is that there are very important family connections, but it should be open, it should be transparent, and it should be part of the public debates. and laws can change, public norms can change. And I think it's very important that this legal transplant is, I should say, not an automatic response. So do not take over all other international standards. Make sure that you as a society agree upon this one. Techno-optimism. In all the countries I've visited as a good governance researcher, I also see that if there's low trust in each other, low trust in governments, we hope that technology takes over. And I think there was also a little bit of mentioning e-government mates. And of course, technology can do great things. We can have, well, a way of the judiciary, which can actually randomly select cases. So there won't be any preferential treatment in a way a judge takes over a verdict. We see e-procurement, so making sure that procurement is done automatically and software actually decides what the procurement should look like. But I'm also afraid, because I've seen it in many countries, that technology is the solution where trust fails. So even if there are good ideas about how to implement new technological solutions here in Aruba, make sure that there's a paragraph, a concrete plan on how should you actually invest also in the moral deliberation. The human being, the critical thinking cannot be left alone. So every technical solution should actually also mean an investment in critical thinking by those who are involved. Otherwise, you will have a child benefit scandal as we had in the Netherlands, in which we trust the artificial intelligence. And after all, we all think, how could it happen that we, all these, well, bright minds actually did not see the outcomes of this technology. So going back to the integrity in education, I would say invest in the basic aspects of integrity in education and end with a specific link to integrity and the technology. Yes, please. Well, already mentioned a few times, there's no grand model, quick fix to strengthen the NIS. We concluded that it's a weakness. And I'm hopeful that things can change, but there's no one thing which we can do that actually makes this NIS very strong tomorrow. So it should be baby steps. It should be baby steps which will influence public trust, which influence accountability, which takes back ownership of individual institutions. And I guess the one thing which I would really would like to welcome is have this public debate about the networks, about the family ties, about the party affiliation. When do we think this is acceptable, and when is it completely an informal circuit undermining all things which we have organized on paper? And this is up to, well, the Aruban society. And I guess there are many platforms like the University of Aruba, which could actually be a good place to have such discussions. Well, the Stichting Deugdelijk Bestuur Aruba is here by order of the Stichting. We did this research, but generally speaking, civil society is also a weak pillar. Many topics which are related to good governance, but there's only a few who are actually actively engaged. And this is the only thing which you can do. It should be from the bottom up. It cannot be done top down. So all of us should actually be engaged in no matter what, but think about how can you be engaged in striving for good governance, whether it's writing or whether it's having discussions, because integrity can never be done on your own. It's not that you can actually look into the mirror and say, am I acting with integrity? Because every individual person thinks of him or herself as acting with integrity. I've never met somebody who said, I'm not acting with integrity. So this requires practicing, and this is something we can only do by actually talking to one another and making sure that we practice how to make integrity alive and not to make it, well, a general value which we all agree upon, but nobody knows how to actually put this into practice. So what do we mean by it in this situation, and what values are at stake, and what is my role in this? And this is something you can do. You can be a pioneer, you can be an ambassador of this way of thinking. And of course, corruption itself, there have been attempts made, but too often still we all consider us to be, well, corruption is a victimless crime, so nobody's actually a victim. So I would definitely call out and say, make sure that you show what actually this is, the damage of corruption is. So whether it's poor education, whether it's poor healthcare or bad infrastructure, make sure that you actually see what has been done by this corrupt money, that we are all victims of it. And democracy as a concept is victim of this. Well, very important, especially also to the Prime Minister and the Minister here. The automatic appointing of ministerial posts, very important to stop that, to make sure that everybody is actually being appointed on the merites, on what have you achieved, and not any other for any other reason. And parliaments. Again, I mentioned the Staten before. I still hope we get to meet some of the Staten MPs. But this is actually one of the weakest pillars which we saw in the NIS Aruba. So the Staten, the parliaments. I mentioned that there's no transparency about the legislation process, but also there is no accountability. It was difficult for us to get to speak to them. And I guess this is the highest body, the elective, this is where our persons should be, and they should actually be open and being, showing what democracy is like. This is the highest body. All children know if we vote, this is where our sovereignty goes to. These are the people who actually act and behave and think in a general interest. So that's the biggest challenge. And I would like to see, if we look at 5 years from now, I hope that big steps have been made towards this pillar. Because I think in the NIS, if this body, this institution is weak, like I mentioned, it will have a domino effect on all other institutions. So this is the one institution which should lead by example, for sure. So control government. That's basically it. It's not rocket science. It's the last bullet point here, again, it's about transparency, but we also noticed that there is little of archiving. So it's not only the day-to-day information of legislation process, decision-making process, which we could not find, but also the older pieces of documentation, which were not to be found. And that makes it impossible for media to be a watchdog. It makes it impossible for the future ombudsman to be a watchdog. It makes it impossible for us as citizens to be a watchdog. We need watchdogs. Democracy as a concept can only work if we have watchdogs in place. And this might hurt now and then, but we all gain from it because it makes us all critical thinkers and makes sure that we, again, have to realize, do we do the things we do on the right way? Ombudsman, I mentioned, of course, there are plans actually to appoint an ombudsman, but I would not dare to be an ombudsman in Aruba, I must say. In this situation, to be a High Council of State, to actually scrutinize public decision-making in terms of behoorlijkheid, well, even the rechtmatigheid is already an issue. So this is a big challenge. I know that there are many, very established individuals who would like to be appointed or would like to apply for such position, but you need to be very brave in order to stand out from the crowds in a system where you have to criticize the ones you love, the ones you are close to. So this is something also for, I guess, the period, the next 2 years. How does the government actually make sure that the electoral management body, the national ombudsman, these High Council of States, which can be great watchdogs, that those qualified individuals within your society actually dare to apply, but also make sure that they have backing, that they are independent and they do not lose their reputation because they are performing as a watchdog. Well, of course, the Public Prosecution Office, this is also, I guess, or plain language, should be legally separated from the Ministry of Justice and Social Affairs. So these, you could say, are quick fixes. This is something which you could organize in, not so much time. Ombudsman already mentioned, also the position of the Electoral Council, especially because there will be new responsibilities in terms of controlling and supervising the financial situation of political parties. Those kind of transparency and supervising this is a very challenging job. And the 4 last bullet points, abolish the permissible practice. So individual decisions on permits. These are very plain, everybody is aware of it. We heard it nearly in all interviews, but it's still standing practice. And this is also, well, laaghangend fruit. This is something which we can decide today to stop with this informal decision-making and favorable treatment. The University of Aruba, the research agenda, I've seen bits and pieces of it, but I hope we can talk about that also the 2nd of May. I know there are many, many good ideas about leadership and SDGs and many combinations. And I think that's very important to make sure that integrity actually is mainstreamed, actually is made operational in terms of other major topics. But of course, this is also getting this message across. I mentioned already academic research, make sure that the wider audience also outside Aruba is aware of the research which is done here and that we can actually do some comparative research. Yes, please. So I'm about to finalize my conclusions. Embrace internal criticism. This is the most challenging thing. And this is something we also in the Netherlands suffer from. As a general, we as individual human beings, we have difficulty in accepting some form of criticism because we feel that we are offended. We like to also defend ourselves. But this is something which we can train, how to be critical in a constructive way, but also to see some criticism as a way, an opportunity to think over, to reconsider the way you do the things you do. And this is culture-wide. This is in all institutions, in all departments with institutions. So this is low-level challenging the internal watchdogs. And if you are practicing that enough, hopefully it's not needed to have whistleblowers in place. But of course, there should be very strong protection for whistleblowers, those who dare at the end to speak out if internally nothing is done with the concerns. Intermediate persons, we came across many positions, you could say, as an intermediary between ministers and all kind of tussenpersonen. And of course, there's little to no transparency. And this is also something which is part of the informal circuit, which is a very, undermining the integrity system of Aruba. And the last bullet point I already mentioned, technology, make sure that the techno-optimism is not dominant on it. So make sure that you invest in the ethical part as well. Yes, please. Yeah. So that was a very short wrap up. 2 years of research with a solid methodology having to be summarized in only 30 minutes. I hope you have noticed some of the features of the Aruban system. Generally speaking, I'm still hopeful, although my message might sound critical, because I know systems can change. I've seen systems change, but of course we should all be part of the change. So please be this ambassador in whatever capacity you are here today. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Willeke Slingerland, for sharing the results and recommendations based on the NIS assessments in preventing and combating corruption and promoting transparency and integrity. And I'm very pleased that the students of our bachelor program, Organization, Government Management, had the opportunity to assist you in the research. And I'm sure that this report will give rise to many questions and critical discussions, possible solutions, and future research. And therefore, I will give the words to Mr. Armand Hessels.
Thank you again. One of the most important goals of our foundation has been from the very beginning the awareness of the community about the quality of governance and especially about the consequences of bad governance for the community. That we try to comply with during the first 5 years. We published in that time, okay, I always have problems with this one. I have to go back pretty far away. Okay. what I was just talking about was the first phase of our foundation that started in 2016 and ran until last year. Last year, just before election, I announced to the community that we were terminating that phase and that we were just waiting for the publication of the NIS report to announce the beginnings of the second phase. Now, what was exactly the contents of the first phase? Well, try to go slowly with this one. We published 6 reports, which were recapitulations of the most important findings of all our important institutions, like the audit office, like the SER, etc., that we combined to check out the policy and the way governance was being done with the personnel policy and also with the financial administration. Later on, we went on with transparency, which was our shortest report because there was not so much transparency to write about. Then we went on with the functioning of Parliament. That was a 4th report, going on with our more extensive reports. That was the socio-economic policy in Aruba, ending up with the most sensitive report, which was integrity. And integrity for myself, but also with all the other reports, were eye-openers. Because we hear always about the way governing was done during decades, but at the moment you read about it, it's not just rumors, it's not just what people say, but you read about it in official reports and you draw your own conclusions. Then you get a different story, a more authentic story. Well, taking into account the fact that there is no reading culture in Aruba, I try to translate the findings of all these reports in videos. There were informative videos, and we made a total of about 27 videos in the past few years, which were very much viewed at. We had average of between 15 to 20,000 views per video, which is not too bad for this type of videos about politics, as a matter of fact. Besides that, we organized 2 symposia, and especially the second one was totally sold out, to our own surprise. And I think it was pretty successful. The concept of good and bad governance that we tried to bring up in the first symposium had a big multiplier effect, and well, that was the result of it. And I think this led ultimately to the findings to the start of the NIS report. Well, one thing that one thing that came as a conclusion for me was, especially based on those reports, that the feeling I got was that the democratic state of law that Aruba formally is was seriously affected in the bad sense. That the rule of law that should be equal to everybody, that it was some people were more equal than others. We know that expression. That the trias politica, as was intended, did not work out in that way, but functions not properly. And that a system of checks and balances, which is a very nice system, was not functioning well. I couldn't say at all, but very deficient. And because the checks and balances system, as a matter of fact, is such a nice system, such a beautiful system, I just want to go a little bit deeper in it. This is the checks and balance system for financial balancing, for financial control. I'm not going to explain every step, but just to make sure that you see that everything is being controlled one after the other. It's a beautiful system if it works. Now, we should ask ourselves, how is this being worked out in Aruba? Well, my findings is that this is the case in Aruba. And this is the case more or less from the very beginning, that every controlling step has been, well, more or less eliminated. Formally, all these different institutions are there, but they are so weak. The quantity of personnel is so low. The budgets are so little that they cannot do their job properly. So as a matter of fact, controlling of our money for decades is very deficient. And as this has always been a matter of critical comments, not only from our own institutions, but also from IMF, from the Central Bureau, the Central Bank of Aruba, from our Dutch partner in the kingdom. My conclusion was that this was not just a matter of amateurism, but this was intentionally made and kept that way, which is, of course, a serious matter. So my question then came, how come that this has been maintained like this during more than 30 years? How come that all these institutions don't function as they should and that nothing is changing? Because all these institutions are composed of people with lots of knowledge, with lots of background, academic, whatever, and nothing is changing. How is that possible? Well, I don't have neither the experience, neither the knowledge to do a more profound research on this. This is a job to be done by people with the real knowledge. And then I start looking which instrument is there to do these findings. And then I came up with the NIS instrument, the National Integrity System. And then I said, who can do this? Because, of course, you try to do this on a local basis, but because of the political sensibility, we know that it's very difficult for our local, let's say, lawyers and so on to do a very objective things because everything is dependent from the outcome. So that's why we went to somebody that we knew that already did the job before, that already had a training and that already did the whole practice of analysis in Holland, our biggest partner, part of the kingdom that we are also part of it. And that's why I came to Willeke and Thomas, who has worked here also, and her team that already had some experience. And the job that, well, she just presented. That was our first phase. This report was the end of the phase of fairness. Then you would wonder, what are we going to do next? Because the reports, I think, I hope, I really hope this will be the last report that is stating what is the situation? How bad is it? Or what? But now we get to the point, what are we going to do with it? We have to go to the action phase. And that is the change that we are hoping that we will achieve in the coming period. You see, for us it's a challenge. The challenge is to correct the situation. And that involves a lot of action. No studying, no analysis. We have so much reports already. We have to work them out. Then, as I already explained, we know the situation is not good. It's bad. Some people even consider it real bad. But I think there is still hope for a fix. Otherwise, I wouldn't be standing here. But in the process of fixing, of course, because of its importance, government is a very important partner. But also because of its track record, it has not enough credibility to take the lead, I think. But it should be a partner together with the commercial sector, with the unions, with the NGOs, with a group of elderly that is growing year after year. And I shouldn't say that, but even becoming a problem. And the young, because we are talking about their future. All these groups have to be involved, and I think they all have to be involved in an equal way, because it's the responsibility of all of us to work on a model that will improve, in the end, the well-being of the whole community, not for just a small group of people, not for what we always hear until we get tired of it, the friends and families. We know about this, but we have to finish that part and go to the new phase. And what we have to do then is talk about an alternative, a new political system. And in that political system, there are some characteristics that should be a real part of it. The first one being an end to political patronage that we all know is happening. An effective functioning of the checks and balances. We have just seen how it works. I tell you, if it really works good, it's so difficult to mess with money. So it's in our own advantage to really work on the improvement of that system. And very important to our feeling, to institutionalize the participation of the community in governmental policy. We should have a part of it. Also, because government is too small. It has not enough, let's say, quality to confront all the problems we are facing now. But we have, in the whole community, I might say, quite some potential for improving, to work together. And I really hope that government and the Minister of Integrity just started with his project of trash and cash, involving more partners in that. We should do it also with the political system. So I hope this is going to be a start of a new game. Now, I have to be frank, and I must say that government already made a start with this, because they accepted the suggestion of our foundation to put in the master plan repositioning our sales, and I can still mention the page because I think it's so important, page 41.12, where it's stated that there should come a public discussion on the political system. So government is inviting us to go on. So the culture of fear, I hope, will get much less with this invitation of government. And I really hope that government will now will challenge the community to participate in this quest. Government also put in the master plan that there should come an intensive campaign on the elimination or the consequences of political patronage, to really inform the public that we cannot go on asking for favors, for personal favors from politicians. As long as we don't do that, if there is no campaign for that, people will go on with this thing. And I can imagine that for the politics, the pressure is so heavy that you cannot always say, no, I can't do it. But we should make an end to it. Now, I can tell you, Willeke said it already, it's no easy way, it's not a fast fix. It will take, well, I hope I can still be a witness of it, but it will take a lot of complex deliberations. And to guide this, our foundation has attracted a person that I'm sure has the confidence of all the sectors in Aruba, also from the government, who has the trust, who has the authority, who has the experience also to guide this process to a certain end. And unfortunately, he is not here to present him in person to you because he's almost going on a trip. he excused himself, but this person is Anselmo Pontilius, who is finishing his work now for the government as a mediator, and he is going to work with us together to guide this process. Then we have the government's participation, where I already discussed with the Minister of Integrity to improve the participation of the public in forming citizen councils and referendum. And finally, we approach the university and especially the good governance and leadership institution, who is working together with section and with the University of Utrecht. And I myself have contacts with the University of Leiden, and I'm starting with Harvard to guide us in this process of trying to come to a more acceptable political system. So that is our plans for the way forward. And I think it's now time for me to give the word to my good friends and partner in this quest, Mrs. Mieke Droog, who is leading the good governance and leadership trust. Thank you, Mieke. Okay.
The Aruba Institute for Good Governance and Leadership is an independent, multidisciplinary, and not-for-profit competence center of the University of Aruba. The institute is organized within the current structure of the university, using services of the Center of Lifelong Learning, and all faculties work together in close cooperation with the Aruban society. The institute, abbreviated as STAR, GGL, was established in 2019. The star in the logo stands for the Star of Aruba in its flag and for the moral compass. The mission of GGL is to improve the quality of public and corporate governance on the island and beyond. And GGL contributes to effective and legitimate leadership on the island and in the region by continued development of governance and leadership expertise, establishing collaboration and building capacities. GDL aims to assist development and application of leadership characteristics aimed at strengthening the integrity, responsibility, and sustainability of governance in public and private sectors. And for that, we distinguish three important types of activities: public lectures and dialogues, training and consultancy, and research. So on the next slide, you will see the upcoming activities that we plan to continue on this report. Dus on this slide, you can see the planned interactive sessions and lectures related to the themes of this NIS report. And we hope to welcome you at the upcoming interactive sessions and hope that this will be a source of inspiration. So I thank you for your attention, and I will pass the words back to Armand Hessels, who will be presenting some hard copies of the NIS report.
Thank you, Mieke. Now we come to the end of this official part. I thank you really for your patience to hear all this, and I hope that it gives you an idea of our next plans. Now we go over to the presentation of hard copies to especially the instances that financed this report. I just started now with the government, who took, let's say, half of the whole cost of this. May I ask the Prime Minister of Aruba to get one report from us. And this is the second copy, because the first copy was handed this morning to the governor of Aruba, who couldn't come tonight. So this is the second copy that was presented. Would you mind to stay here just for a little moment? The Minister of Integrity already said that he's going to use this report for his next plan. So I think he needs this report also. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yes, and I wish you a lot of success with it. Then I would call, if possible, the president of the Central Bank of Aruba, because we have here at one side let's say the government who paid 1/2 of the whole cost, but then we had a community. From the community, we already had 4 different institutions that helped pay for the cost, and one of them was the Central Bank of Aruba, President Mrs. Jane Simeleer, who in the last symposium already had also participated as a speaker, and for which we are still very grateful. You're very welcome, and thank you very much for, yes? Another partner was the Aruba Bank. And the Aruba Bank was, as a matter of fact, the first institution that, without me going to them, they called me and said, listen, we want to be a partner with you with this project. We are going to sponsor part of this project. So I think Mrs. Laureen Dix is here as a representative of the Aruba Bank, because she was on the list, but maybe she couldn't make it. I heard some people here got COVID these days. No other representative of the Aruba Bank? Okay. Then the Caribbean Mercantile Bank was also a very good sponsor, and we have one person from the Caribbean Mercantile Bank. I have seen Sandy Odor and Gabo Mansour. Yes. Mr. Gabo Mansour, thank you very much for... Thank you. Then, VNO was also an important sponsor, but VNO couldn't make it. He has personal things at home, so he also will get it in a personal way. Those were the instances that participated in the financing, and again, we are very grateful for them. I want to call one other institution that has been, let's say, important part of study, which is Parliament. And I want to call Mr. Raymond Kamperveen as the Vice President of the Parliament. Mr. Raymond Kamperveen. Hoping that you will have also a personal encounter with the investigators. Okay, this is the whole group. May I have a picture of all these people together? And Mrs. Willeke, can you please come with us? And Mieke. And there is a very important partner also, Mrs. Viola, because Viola Huidger, who is the rector, from the very beginning also sustained the cooperation between the university and our foundation, which we're very glad for.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, esteemed speakers, I think it has been a highly interesting evening. I ask for a big round of applause for Stichting Deugdelijk Bestuur for making this National Integrity Scan report possible, and for tonight's speakers. We are now coming to the closure of this evening, and I'm sure this report will give rise to many questions, critical discussions, possible solutions, and further research. I hereby invite, therefore, all students and lecturers to the interactive session on 28 April at 12:45. This interactive session is planned so that students can engage in a dialogue with Willeke and Thomas about the NIS report's valuable findings, challenges, and how students and young professionals can contribute to solutions and the joint creation of a resilient democracy. And I find you all for the interactive session for the public with Willeke and Thomas, which will take place on the 2nd of May at 10 o'clock in room A. We sincerely hope that you will make use of this opportunity and that this session will inspire you. After all, we need each other to achieve a change. And finally, I now invite you to the reception in the Students' Park on the right side of the aula. Thank you very much.